They did not leave you for nobody. They left you for someone who was already there, waiting, warmed up, ready to step into the exact space you used to occupy, before you had even finished packing your things. You called it moving on fast. You told yourself it must have been rebound behavior, grief working itself out in an unhealthy way. But what if it was not fast at all? What if the timeline you think you know is wrong? What if the person who came after you did not come after you? Stay with that question, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how long they had been building your replacement, and exactly why they needed you to never find out. Picture the moment it usually happens. You find out. Maybe a mutual friend mentions it too casually. Maybe you see a photo. Maybe you simply notice the timing does not add up, because the relationship you thought had just ended was already being replaced before it was over. Behind her, unseen, he moves through his evening exactly as he always did, unbothered, untouched by the discovery happening 2 rooms away. This is the moment most people misdiagnose. They assume the new person appeared after the breakup. A coincidence of timing. Bad luck. The universe being unkind. It is not a coincidence. It has a name. Monkey barring. The term comes from the playground. A child swings from one bar to the next without ever letting go of the first, because letting go while midair means falling. Some people do not leave relationships. They swing out of them, one hand still gripping you, the other already reaching for the next bar, which means the overlap was never an accident. It was structural. It was the entire plan. The sudden distance, the late replies, the excuses that felt thin but not quite provable. None of it looked like betrayal at the time. It looked like someone pulling away, growing distant, needing space. It was never distance. It was someone quietly testing whether the next bar could hold his weight before he ever let go of yours. So why does someone do this? Why not simply end it cleanly and then look for someone new? Because ending it cleanly requires something monkey bars cannot tolerate: a gap. A period of being alone with themselves, without a source of validation actively pouring in. For most people, that gap is uncomfortable. For this pattern of person, it is unbearable. Here is the first layer of the mechanism. The overlap is not about romance. It is about supply continuity. If his sense of worth depends on being desired, on having somewhere warm to land, someone reflecting value back at him, then a single day without that reflection feels like free fall. So the next source has to be lined up, tested, and warmed before the current one is released. Not because the new person is special, because the position cannot stay empty. That is layer 1. Here is layer 2, and this is the part that actually explains what happened to you. The overlap window is also a controlled exit. While he is quietly building the next connection, he is also carefully managing how you experience the ending. Notice how it rarely looks like abandonment in the moment. It looks like drifting. Like things just changing. Like nobody's fault. That framing is deliberate. Because if the ending looks mutual and unclear, you are less likely to ask hard questions. Less likely to demand honesty. Less likely to discover the overlap at all, until sometimes months later, you do. Now let us name the specific tells, because this is where the pattern becomes something you can actually recognize, not just understand in hindsight, but catch while it is still happening. Watch for a sudden increase in privacy that has no clear cause. A phone that used to sit face up on the table now sits face down, or leaves the room with him entirely. Watch for a new vagueness around plans and time. Evenings that used to be accounted for become busy with work or seeing friends, without names attached. Watch for a subtle change in how he responds to your affection. A flicker of discomfort, quickly covered, when you reach for him the way you always have. None of these, on their own, prove anything. That is precisely what makes this pattern so difficult to catch. Each individual sign is small enough to explain away. It is only when you stack them together, the privacy, the vagueness, the flinch, that the shape of what is actually happening becomes visible. And here is the third layer, the one almost nobody talks about, because it is the part designed specifically to make you doubt your own perception. While the overlap is happening, you are often told, directly or through implication, that you are imagining things, that you are insecure, that your suspicion says more about you than about him. That conversation sits differently in memory now than it did 6 months ago. The calm reassurance, the slightly wounded tone, the way you ended up apologizing for asking. That is not an accident either. It is the same reality distortion engine this channel has decoded before, just wearing a different, more mainstream outfit, dressed up as ordinary modern dating instead of anything more clinical. There is also a quieter fourth layer worth naming, because it explains why this pattern so often works even on people who consider themselves careful, self-aware, and hard to fool. Monkey barring depends on your own decency. It depends on you extending good faith, giving the benefit of the doubt, assuming that someone who once loved you would not build an exit behind your back while still sleeping beside you. That assumption is not naivety. It is basic trust, the same trust that makes healthy relationships possible in the first place. The pattern does not succeed because you were foolish. It succeeds because it is specifically engineered to exploit the exact quality that makes you a good partner. So when you look back now and the timeline suddenly makes sense, when the coincidental new relationship turns out to have started while you were still very much in the picture, you are not being paranoid. You are simply seeing, finally, what was actually always there. Now, here is where this pattern connects to something we have already fully decoded on this channel. Because monkey barring is not really a dating trend. It is a specific application of a much older mechanism, one we broke down in detail in our video on the new supply. That video explained what happens after discard. The replacement showcased, seemingly effortless, seemingly happy, arriving almost too quickly to be believed. What this video adds is the missing piece before that one begins. The new supply did not simply appear after you. In many of these dynamics, the new supply was already being cultivated, quietly in parallel, while you were still the one being reassured that nothing was wrong. Monkey barring is the bridge phase. The new supply is what that bridge phase produces. One hand still resting on the frame of what he is leaving, already facing toward what comes next. If what you just heard in this video answered why did they move on so fast, the video on the new supply answers the harder question that usually comes right after it. Why do they look so happy, and why does it feel so unfair? Watch that one next. It is linked below, and it is the video this entire pattern was quietly building toward. This is not two separate people doing two separate things. It is one continuous behavior, viewed from two different angles, the exit and the arrival. Here is what to actually do with everything you just learned. Stop rerunning the timeline, looking for the moment you failed. You did not cause an overlap you were never told about. You cannot outlove, outfix, or outperform your way out of a pattern that was never about you in the first place. It was about whether the position stayed filled. That is usually where this actually starts. The relief people describe after seeing this pattern clearly is not about the new person, and it is not about winning some invisible comparison. It is about no longer holding yourself responsible for a transition you were deliberately kept from seeing. If you are currently in the early stage of noticing these tells, the face-down phone, the vague evenings, the flinch you cannot quite explain, you do not need certainty before you take yourself seriously. You do not need a confession, a screenshot, or a perfect piece of evidence to justify asking direct questions and expecting direct answers. Watching for a pattern is not the same as accusing someone falsely. It is simply paying attention to what is actually in front of you, instead of only to what you are being told. And if you are further along, if the overlap has already been confirmed, if the timeline has already resolved itself into something undeniable, give yourself permission to grieve two things at once. Grieve the relationship you thought you were in, and grieve the version of the ending you were denied, the honest one, the one where someone simply told you the truth instead of managing your perception of it. Both griefs are real. Neither one requires the other person's cooperation to be valid. If this explains something you have been quietly turning over for months, the timing that never quite added up, the ending that never got a real explanation, you are not alone in that, and you are not wrong for finally asking. Full breakdown of what happens on the other side of this, the new supply, and why it looks the way it does, is linked right here. Watch that one next. It picks up exactly where this pattern leaves off, and it will likely explain a few more things that never quite sat right. And if this gave you language for something you could feel but could not name, share it with someone who needs the same clarity you just got. Sometimes the most useful thing you can hand another person is simply the name for what happened to them. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.